Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to Fully Book Chats. It's been almost a year since we launched Fully Book Chats for conversations with authors about their books and creative processes. This is a very special event because we partnered with Arete Ateneo for this. As the creativity and innovation hub of the Ateneo de Manila University, Arete provides the space and freedom for groups from different fields and persuasions to create, collaborate on, and share knowledge, skills, and practices. Currently, Arete is releasing programs through Arete Connect, an online portal where you can access their programs no matter where you are. Arete Connect has programs such as the Ateneo Magisterial Lecture Series, Sandaang Salaysay Podcast, Quick Think, Our Way Forward, Arete in Motion, and Arete Makerspace. Visit their website, arete.ateneo.edu, their YouTube channel, and follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Arete Ateneo to access their programs for free. My pleasure to introduce our interviewer for today, Mr. Glenn Diaz. Glenn Diaz's first book, The Quiet Ones, won the 2017 Palanca Grand Prize and the Philippine National Book Award. His second novel, Iniga, was shortlisted for the 2020 Nobel Prize. Born and raised in Manila, he is currently pursuing doctoral studies at the University of Adelaide in Australia. Mr. Glenn Diaz will be interviewing Ms. Gina Apostol. Gina Apostol's fourth novel, Insurrecto, was named by Publishers Weekly one of the 10 best books of 2018, an editor's choice of the NYT, and shortlisted for the Dayton Prize. The New York Times calls Insurrecto a bravura performance. Apostol is a magician with the language. Think Borges, think Nabokov. Her third book, Gun Dealer's Daughter, won the 2013 Pen or Open Book Award. Her first two novels, Bibliopsy and The Revolution According to Raymundo Mata, both won the Juan Laya Prize for the novel, Philippine National Book Award. Her most recent work uses her research on the Philippine-American War to cast a lens on our contemporary times. She was a fellow at Civitella Ranieri in Umbria, Italy, and the Emily Harvey Foundation, among other fellowships. Her essays and stories have appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Review of Books, Foreign Policy, Gettysburg Review, Massachusetts Review, and others. She lives in New York City and Western Massachusetts and grew up in Tacloban, Leyte in the Philippines. She teaches at the Fieldston School in New York City. Let's all welcome Mr. Glenn Diaz and Ms. Gina Apostol.
Okay. Thank you so much, Carla. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Gina. How are you?
Hello. So good to see you,
Good to see
Glenn.
you. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. It's a huge privilege, obviously, and an honor and a pleasure to talk to Gina Apostol today about her latest book, The Revolution According to Raymundo Mata. When I say latest, I mean the latest to be published in the US. We, her avid Filipino readers, have obviously long read and enjoyed this book, and personally, it's so exciting for me to, have a brilliant book find an even broader audience. No? So, Gina, how are you? You've been doing all these events, no, and during these very interesting times. How is it?
Yeah, it's a lot because I'm teaching as well as doing
Mm,
the book events. But you're right. It's really nice to have a book that is, in my view, so Filipino
yeah.
to be given to have a bigger readership. And another thing is that it's really nice to be talking to you, Glenn. So
Nice to
I'm
talk to you,
really
Gina.
honored and pleased that we're having this opportunity.
Okay, so we don't have a lot of time, so I'll just go straight to my questions, I suppose. So, I've been to like a couple, maybe three or four of your events in relation to the publication. It's always, there's really no one who I'd rather listen to talk about history and fiction writing and art making and all these wonderful things. And I told you it's so wonderful to dive back into this Gina Apostol universe because Insurrecto is just so fresh in our minds, and that's my first question. No? In Insurrecto, that book, at the heart of that book is Kashana Nacionales, no, and having her at the center of that book really like refashioned our understanding of the Balangige episode in the Filipino-American War. So here we have another sort of mostly forgotten historical figure. No? Can you tell us about that moment when you thought, there's a novel that can be structured around this interesting Raymundo Mata figure?
I know. Yeah, I really wanted to do something on Rizal, this concept of Rizal as an artist and not the guy on nakastatwa, the statue guy.
Right.
But it's really hard to do that. It's hard to do Rizal straight on. I mean, it's not really doable. So I did a lot of research, and I read Raymundo Mata came up first in Santiago Alvarez's Katipunan and the Revolution. So if anyone's interested in like funny, crazy, first-hand accounts of the Philippine Revolution, Santiago Alvarez, who was a Katipunero in Cavite, his father was Mariano Alvarez, who became a great general of the revolution. He also was a general, but Raymundo Mata occurs in his book. It's such it was a strange incident. A key moment for the Katipunan is when they went to Dapitan to ask Rizal whether or not they should go to war, which is a funny thing to do already. Right. But you could only visit Rizal in Dapitan if you were a doctor and you're a patient. So the Katipunan very literally sent a real doctor and a real patient. And it was so odd to think it's such a pivotal moment because it is shrouded in controversy, whatever it is that Rizal said. But in that controversial moment, there actually was this guy who happened to be actually blind, and his name had Mata in it, Raymundo Mata, which is really like, for a writer, that's just gold.
Yeah.
And so I thought that is the figure I could use to think about Rizal, because he's a patient of Rizal. He saw Rizal, but no one knows him. And he, an unknown figure in a pivotal moment, that's really gold for a novelist, I think.
Right. And this is about Rizal, no? I mean, of course, it's mediated. I mean, our experience of this universe, of this world, is mediated via Raymundo Mata, but it is about Rizal. I remember, of course, he's in the cover for one, no? I remember when I was reading it, rereading it for the second time, no? There was I felt like a jolt of electricity when his presence was referenced in the novel. No, he did not even make an appearance yet. No, he was just referenced as, oh my God, the writer is back. No, and there's this novel. No, I wonder if you can talk to us a bit more about how you went about the task, the brave, very courageous task of rendering Rizal. No, and you mentioned for a Filipino reader that has to contend with the outsized like place of Rizal in our imagination growing up and reading him, etc.
Yeah, you know what? And this is great that you're bringing this up, because of course it doesn't come up in my American interviews, that it's actually really blasphemous. I thought it was, I felt throughout the writing of this that I'm doing something very blasphemous. I love Rizal. There's no way out. As a writer, I love him very much. And part of the reason why I wrote this is my sense that we don't see him in terms of the agony of being a writer. I think ultimately there was that's really core to Rizal. And so for me, I think you're absolutely right. My novel had to build up to the moment when Rizal appears. If it did not work, the novel doesn't work. If you don't have that, as you're calling it, electric, I'm so happy actually that you said that, because that really is I was really building toward that jolt of the appearance of Rizal. But how do you do that? Here's one thing, and I don't talk about this a lot, but in order to get to Rizal, I plagiarized Rizal. I completely plagiarized. I mean, there's a section in the text where it's Raymundo Mata is supposedly going to La Consolacion and visiting this girl, the Lady K, the Lady K. The Lady K for me is really Segunda Katigbak. That's one of the querida Rizal. And what I did with that, I couldn't figure out the how to speak Rizal. So I plagiarized him. There is a text called Memorias de un Estudiante en Manila. So that's his journal of his time in Ateneo. And so what I did was, it was only in Spanish and in Tagalog. I couldn't find an English version. So I translated him into English. I translated Memorias into English, but I put all bullshit things in there, like making puppets or doing, finger puppets. So all of those things that Rizal didn't do and didn't include, I put in there. But a lot of it is word for word my English translation of Memorias. So I actually and that was very interesting, the plagiarism and the translating of Rizal, because I managed to get into the 19th century diction too and syntax. And once I plagiarized him, I felt really more in tune. He's really sentimental and awkward and stupid in the Memorias. As a girl, I'm going, that's dumb. But it was also so human to see him in this way, to see him so awkward. And so I love that about the Memorias. It's so beautifully awkward. And I love those aspects of writing, the ephemera of writing. I love ephemera. I'm always reading the marginalia of the notes of the books that writers own. So I did a lot of research on Rizal. I think I've read everything that Rizal has written that's published by Rizal in English, that's been translated. So that's the way I approached it. I approached it by being over research. I over researched, to have a sense of authority.
Okay. Right, and yeah, you talked about all these little explosive moments leading up to that final encounter. When this little funny group finally making their way to the pita, and I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't read it, but that first moment of encounter, you would think that it's gonna be like this profound moment, and then the first thing
pandak pala.
and I was really laughing, it's so funny, and precisely because it proceeds from like almost reverential dimension that we give Rizal, and then but at the same time, we Filipinos, we make fun of his height. I mean, we pay attention to things like that, and I wanna, if I can pick apart like one tiny thing that you mentioned. We never actually see Rizal. We encounter Rizal via text, but we never actually see him writing or revising or we our encounter with him is always via all these grand novels and essays, etc. So I wonder if you can talk about the importance of actually reading Rizal and seeing him as a writer, as an artist.
Yeah, I think it's so important for us to see him as someone who probably revised. I mean, clearly, if you go and look at the notes, if you go and look at the manuscripts, you can see him, taking out this line, and that is kind of, again, a kind of blasphemy that Filipinos will, oh my God, Rizal revised. Wow. That's kind of weird, to imagine. But I think it's so important for us to imagine him in moments of uncertainty,
Sure.
in moments of thinking about something beyond the revolution, because of course, something beyond the nation, just like I need to write a good novel. I'm interested. For instance, I think filibusterismo is like a revision of the Noli. That's how I read the Fili. And so it's important for us to see the contingency in Rizal so that we can also kind of reflect on ourselves in, I think, a more healthy way. Because we end up doing binary thinking with Rizal. He's not a revolutionary. He's only he's this and that. He's all of those. Just as we are also all of these things, that we are very radical. If we recognize our radical history and recognize that is who we are, and from that radicalism, understand it comes from a very interesting contingency in that the radical is very human. And so when we think about our history, recognize the beautiful ethics of it, which is we began with saying, with killing Magellan.
Sure.
That's a beautiful ethic in that we recognize, hey, you're not doing the right thing by me, I'm going to kill you. But the ethics of that lies in whom we are fighting, and Rizal fought the right fights.
Okay.
So I think that's really important to understand radicalism and contingency.
And I think that's kind of reflected in the form. And this is always I transition quite constantly to the other, probably the most striking for someone who would be reading it for the first time. Now, the form of this book is quite extraordinary. Of course, it's about text. But the main sort of body is this found Mata manuscript, the found Mata papers, and then you have all these commentators coming from very specific discourses, sort of nagbabangayan, nagchichismisan, and you're kind of reading this text alongside these women, and they're all women. I wonder if you can talk about that structure. Now, you have the main body, and you have annotations in the footnotes.
Yeah, there's the Journal of Raymundo Mata, and the Journal of Raymundo Mata is also kind of weird in that it's really set up so that there's a kind of history of Filipino texts in the text that Raymundo Mata actually does. So there's like bugtong, palagtasan, all of these things are in the text, folk tales, all of these things. And then there's his own biography. So there's that kind of the whole in the part, the whole of this is really ambitious, but it's the whole of Philippine literature in a part of his autobiography. So and then there's his his reading, his meeting with Rizal, etc. And then there are the three women who are all historians of some sort, and one of them is younger than the others. One of them is a nationalist. Another one is a Lacanian type, like a weird Lacanian. I made a fake Lacanian figure, Claro Mork. And the translator, Mimi Magsalin, who appears in Insurrecto. Magsalin appears in Insurrecto. And I thought it was very important to have this kind of, to approach Rizal also as a reader in the way that Filipinos kind of approach our history. Even historians approach our history like chismis.
Sure.
Like I remember going to UP and talking to historians I wanted to know what they thought about Pio Valenzuela. And immediately the historian says, ay, sinungaling yan. So Valenzuela's a liar, all of these things. So I know that we do have that. We tend to think of Philippine history also in personal terms. I think we will side with Bonifacio. We'll side with, no one really sides with Aguinaldo, so whatever. But we have to be conyo to side with Aguinaldo. Not that siding with Aguinaldo is bad, I will say. Having read about the Philippine-American War, I think there's huge problems with a binary of Aguinaldo Bonifacio. But I think that personalan was important for me in giving the Philippine voice of how to read this history.
Okay. And yeah, I do agree. There is a layer of probably comprehension that only a Filipino reader would get. And the book doesn't really attempt to over-explain stuff. When I was reading the first part, yeah, I did recognize bits from, of course, Florante at Laura, Urbana at Felisa. There's a anachronistic song somewhere there, and all these will probably go over the head of an American reader, but there's a distinct pleasure for a Filipino reader, approaching this text. Now, if we can talk a bit about that interplay between textuality and orality. Yeah, it is a hyper textual book. So conscious of it being textual, its idea of the nation as text, etc., of history as text. But at the same time, yeah, it is a very oral world, and much of the humor, actually, I think, much of the humor comes from, and the pleasure comes from that orality. I wonder if that was a conscious design, or
it was
idea
very
that you had in mind.
conscious. It's how I I mean, we the way we've done history is really like even the way we do it in but the way I learned about Balangiga was just gossip. People just
Mhm.
saying, "Oh yeah, Balangiga, that's not really a massacre. The real massacre was blah blah blah." Anyway, so how we receive history for me is very oral, also very textual. And you have to understand also when I was doing the research on this book, Philippine history is just so contentious. It's full of textual hoaxes. There's a whole hoax on Rizal's retraction, that on his deathbed, he retracted like Chaucer, you know, like I didn't really believe in these things about the Jesuits, those kinds of things. And I consider it a hoax. Some people thought it was real. The minutes of the Katipunan, it's a hoax, apparently. So and part of that I think that textuality has an interesting aspect of our orality where we're trying to figure out, oh, totoo ba yan? Is that really? Is there that chismis? Stuff like that, Partly because of our colonization, partly because the texts that we tend to have read were actually not about ourselves. So we
Sure.
had to create ourselves. And our desire lies in that textuality and that orality, our desire to see ourselves. And so for me, ultimately, that mix of the textual and the oral that is in the novel, and that I'm constantly trying to figure out the relationship to the relationships of each to each, of the text to the orality. I think they are basically the textuality of the novel lies in my sense of the orality of ourselves, and that orality of ourselves that gets moved into these hoax texts lies in the power of our desire to be seen.
I was just thinking about it. This is a bit of a segue. In the government's pandemic response, a lot of it is mediated via language. I remember just thinking about all these, terms about community quarantine instead of a lockdown, ayuda, granular lockdown, etc. So there's really like I suppose for the colonized, there's really like a specific apprehension of the world via language, and then probably a way to reckon with that is also our own language, and it's so wonderful to hear you talk about this, because in somewhere you mentioned that the Philippines is as a country can be seen as an idea that's always on the brink of being translated or fully
Yeah.
apprehended,
Mhm.
and that's sometimes seen as like a position of agony, but you kind of reframe that as it's actually a position of strength.
It's a position of strength and opportunity, and it's a position of ourselves always centering in some ways. Like we understand that we are being that there's an other out there. We always understand it. I'm a Waray, so of course I always understand it. In terms of Tagalog, there's an other Tagalog. There's this, there's that. Even the Cebuano, but there's a weird feeling that I have, and I don't know if it comes from just the way I was brought up, but there's a weird feeling that I have that Filipinos, amid all the othering that's done to us, always, for whatever reason, for good or bad, center ourselves. And that comes through in how we will joke about Duterte or not joke about Duterte. I mean, all the different ways that we can be caught by the authoritarian, as well as resist the authoritarian. But there's a lot, I think, that we don't, and that's just me. I just feel that we center ourselves, and that's a power.
No, and it's something that sort of comes naturally to us, that it's almost invisible. The fact that you're writing I always have to keep reminding myself, I'm writing in a second language. I'm writing in English, so I have to and then the very next moment you're talking to someone in Tagalog. I mean that kind of multiplicity is almost it's always been there. So you don't even pay attention to it, but it's so like extraordinary.
It's extraordinary, and I imagine there are many multiple language, multilingual cultures that are like that. But I imagine that almost all of those multilingual cultures also don't think about it, and so it doesn't become articulated. And I think what I've been doing in the novels is kind of articulating something that I think is really endemic and really powerful and not seen, and yet a strength. That we keep seeing it as not a strength because it seems like a deficit, not to be
Right.
seemingly complete. But the fact is, there's not a single goddamn human who is complete. And the fact that we are so, we exhibit this fascinating incompleteness and center yet who we are, I think is really interesting about the Filipino.
Okay. How do you? This is weird. No, whenever I have to teach like an elective, like a contemporary Filipino novel or something, no, my students semi seriously complain that it's almost like a Gina Apostol course because I teach like I don't know, I assign like 3 of your novels, no, and I always instruct, no, not instruct them. I always remind them, no, that of course the content is fine, but also you have to pay attention to your experience of reading the works because the reading experience is itself a source of meaning. I wonder if you have any. I mean, for like someone approaching your work for the first time, do you have an ideal way in which you wish your books would be read?
So in a way, for me, that centering, if my books, the reader is part of my book. I mean, I can include the reader in my book. That's why my books, people say they're confusing. Confusion is part of the reading experience. And for me, when I'm confused in the text, that's when I think about what I'm doing. And I think about who I am and why am I reading it this way? And why don't I get it here? And so it allows me to be more metacognitive and think about, so I actually think about the act of reading when I'm confused. And so I deliberately use that in my novels because I'm interested in that very experiential act that is reading. And that experiential act of reading for me allows us to think about ourselves a little bit more and why we're doing what we're doing. And in terms of the colonization issue, it really does, for me, we always, as Filipinos, we always have to think about why we're thinking the way we're thinking, because we've always been taught to think through the eyes of our enemies, I think. And that happens to be true even with the post-colonial, with our dictatorial governments. So we have to be very aware of how we're being led. And I think that's a healthy way to read. So for me, if you're being introduced to my novels and you're confused, you're in the right spot. And to trust yourself in that spot, and in fact, to center yourself in that spot.
I just remember there was a point in the novel in which the commentators are reading Mata, reading Rizal, and of course you're reading the footnotes. So it's really like there's pleasurably vertiginous, almost endless layers of reading. It's really a joy. Can we talk about the women in the in the work, in the novel? Of course we have Rizal and the Raymundo Mata, but they're surrounded by women. And again, if you know Rizal's history with all these women, you kind of recognize some of the characters, and they're the characters, but they're also not. No, I'm assuming it's a very conscious decision to populate this world with all these women.
I use the names of Rizal's queridas, like Orang. He has 2 Leonors, he has 2 Leonors. There's not only one Leonor, there are 2. So there's Leonor Rivera and there's another one. So there's Leonor, there's the Leonor, and then there's Orang, who is the other Leonor that I had. And she's the one I love Orang. She's the one who, she's the one who is like the one whom he meets with the Bonifacio people. And then there's Leonor de Lechera, and she's the one who actually, Leonor de Lechera is the one who saves the manuscript of Raymundo Mata. And so all of them, for me, I wanted the women to be more knowing than Rizal, to kind of be aware of being put in their different places and saying fuck you. And they're also fucking they're also fuckers. So I I I always, and this is, I think it must be the way I also see women. I see women as a lot more knowing, so, a lot more
That's
knowing
fine.
than men. I just see them as, because they have to be other. Women are othered all the time. You're always put in this place of, the wife, all of these things, and that puts you, just like the colonized, that puts you in a place of double seeing constantly. And at the same time that you're kind of aware, just as the colonized is aware, that you know more, a little bit more. For one thing, you gave birth to these goddamn beings,
Sure.
So I do have that sense with women as being these secret super spy, superhero type people, they're being put in their place, but their consciousness, for me, is very interesting. So they are very deliberately the names of Rizal's queridas, I have to say, the women that Raymundo Mata goes out with.
Okay, yeah, and so the kind of design that's formal but also very political, kind of, I mean, many iterations of that in this project. No, the official sort of thing, and then you have all these commentators. I'm curious if you can talk about our annotators.
Yeah,
For people familiar with your work,
yeah.
yeah. Can you
I will
talk
say
about that?
this about them in terms of writing about them. I would go through these, like, I myself, as a person, as a writer, or just as a reader of them, I would go through my own, like, I hate you. Oh, yeah, you're correct now. You're correct. Or, oh no, you're stupid. You're stupid. Those, I myself would do that as I'm writing these characters. And I saw them one, formally, I saw them as triangular, so that you have a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis, so that once someone says one thing, someone says that's stupid, someone says, oh, here's another way to look at that. Okay. And then you go on. So there's a kind of interesting triangulation, which I think allows a non-binary way of thinking about everything. So you do away with the non-binary by having a triad. So, and sometimes one would be more interesting to me than another. Definitely for a long time in doing the novel, I loved Dr. Diwata, because she was doing things about language, talking about how to psychoanalyze people through words that a writer's always doing, that I'm always doing. But then at the same time, I'm thinking, so Estrella Espejo, the nationalist, has a lot of weird things. I'm not at heart a nationalist. I am politically a nationalist, but at heart, I think nationalism is funny. Sure. There's something absurd about a concept of nation. There's something, essentialist about the concept of nation. But there's something about the emotional power of the nationalist that I began to fall into with Estrella. And so there'd be those times when, I feel so bad for Estrella, those kinds of things. And then the translator, of course, I'm on her side because she's the writer. And I really like the way the translator has to be in this other space of not being a knower. And I do recognize that it is something that I enjoy doing and being, even as a person, just like, okay, whatever, I'm not going to say anything, but this is, when you're on Twitter, you go, this is really dumb. And you're just going, okay, you're just watching Twitter and you're going, okay, this is dumb. I'm not going to say anything, but this is dumb. And so the translator is that kind of neutral person who reserves everything, reserves her knowing to herself. And so they occupy, each one will occupy the foreground space and then recede. Foreground and recede. And I think that's the way I think about people. It's the way I think about even my daughter. I mean, I love my daughter, but you know how you're always an analyst. It's how you think about everything. And so it allows a very rich analysis, I think.
I must say, I also that's also my journey when trying to think about these commentators. Of course, my initial bias would be towards the nationalists, but then eventually, you know, all three would make their voices heard, and after a while when they sort of disappeared after the first part, it was kind of lonely reading all these papers by yourself. You alluded Twitter. Do you have any thoughts on social media? In Selecta, there's this preoccupation with mediation, media, etc. No? So and that's kind of, well, for me, when I like do social media and the internet in general, there's that kind of same experience of being hyperlinking, etc.
Right. No, in fact, I think a lot of my novels, in some ways, Raymundo Mata was way before the social media thing, but I do think it has a Twitter. It has a weird Twitter form.
Yeah.
There's a weird Twitter form in that, when you're on Twitter and then someone has when someone does the retweeting, but it seems as if it's your tweet, but it's not really your tweet.
Right.
And,
right.
So you have these kinds of weird, the destabilizing what seems to be the main text. And also the fact that there is no, on Twitter, you could have a whole series of things where everything is just paratext.
Sure.
Nothing is the main text. There's like Twitter is all paratext. So it's all the bottom part of my novel. And so there are obviously many drawbacks to having a world that is all paratext. But the reality of the paratext, when we put the paratext just under the rug, we're also not going to be healthy, and we're also not going to be true. But when it's only the paratext, that's also a problem.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way of thinking about Twitter. Yeah, it is. When all these official narratives are put out there, they're always sort of undermined by comments from the people. No, and then eventually the official narrative gets buried. No, and that's that quote retweeting, that's also annotating, to a certain extent. That's a wonderful way of thinking about it. I'm curious, have you been following of course it's 2021, so it's 500 years after the first contact, Magellan. So it's April, we're recording this April something. So 500 years ago, Magellan is probably, in Eastern Visayas. And just,
Well, he was on my island.
Right. I wonder if you have any thoughts about commemorating something like this, because there's been ongoing conversation.
I think it was correct for him to be killed. I think that was good. I think we should be, we're justifiably, I think as an emblem of our resistance to power and to authoritarianism. I think the killing of Magellan is a very good emblem. I also think that that Magellan, as that figure of authoritarian and of power, is we can, again, I'm just looking at the way I would read it. We can also see him in terms of as being caught in the the relations of Lapu-Lapu versus the Cebu versus, like he got caught, like the power figure who is unaware of the relations among the islanders. And you can also see you can see him also as the beloved of Pigafetta, and so sad for Pigafetta, the mirror died, la la la. So you can see all of these different ways to see the moment of Magellan's arrival as a novel, as the novelistic form of history. As Aristotle says, history is only facts, but art is true. So art is true in the sense that the multiple ways of viewing that scene are really important. but the ethical way of seeing that scene, to accept that colonization without recognition of the horror of that colonization is truly, truly for me. If people are still doing that in this day and age, that is a horror. It's despicable. I think we should be proud of our radicalism. And if we are going to see Lapu-Lapu as part of their radicalism, that's fine with me. He's also a fish, so that's good too. A very good fish.
Very expensive also.
It's expensive.
It's expensive.
Anyway, and so yeah, and even that, the fact of class and economy in the fish that is Lapu-Lapu. But I think we should always rest on getting rid of the powers that oppress us. And when we accept the story of colonization in that oppressive way, I think we should just say bullshit to that.
Yeah. I think your works are quite clear about that. No, I mean, there is a difference, between conceding that there are, multiplicities in terms of looking at our history, but the ethical position must be, clear.
You must take ethical subject position. I mean, it's really, and I'm going to be honest, it's not that hard.
Sure. Yeah.
It's the only problem is that the Philippines, in terms of our revolution, has never really gotten out of the classist position. Our revolution has had a classist, had classist aspects to it that we haven't really addressed in a powerful way. We keep just doing this Bonifacio versus Aguinaldo, and even that is superficial.
So on that note, may I ask, for my last question, what's next for you after this one? What are you working on anything or? Yeah.
Oh yeah, I just finished the novel. I just sold it actually to Soho. So I sold it to my current press, and it's my reworking of the novel I was working on with Insurrecto. Insurrecto was like my recess novel. My main novel was really this thing called William McKinley's World. But then I completely redid that novel. So it's really about my mom. It's really crazy. It's just about my mother, which is really weird because I do not do personal things. I do not, it's anathema to me to do personal things. But there was something that happened, and it may have been the pandemic that made it happen, where I thought that I just need to say true things, real things. And so it is also a novel that has what I call, obstructions. So it does have these obstructions, and the obstruction happened to be, I had to actually experience it. It had to have been true. Or at least in my mind, it was true. So, and it was all about my mother. And it was just a way, I think, to really, in some ways, mourn for my mom during the pandemic. And my mom died a long time ago. She died in 2000. So that's a really long mourning process. But so that's what happened to that. And really right now I'm trying to do this really, really big novel, which is probably going to be a very, very small novel, about Paz Luna, the wife of Juan Luna, and I'm going to have her be a patient of Freud. Yeah, so it's really about Freud and like really going after Freud in terms of the way he views women, but using Paz and the death of Paz as like the plot. I mean, as you know, the plot for me is like, but there's something else going on.
So we'll probably see Diwata Drake again in this.
Diwata might. No, I'm trying to figure out. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see who occurs there. It's actually the structure of that novel is like Wuthering Heights, because you know how there's a Heathcliff and Heathcliff is crazy, and then Catherine, so right. Heathcliff and Catherine, but Freud is in it.
Interesting.
Actually,
okay.
Freud.
Interesting.
Freud.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Gina. Thank you so much.
It's so good to talk to you. I wish I could talk to you about Iniga. If you do a fully booked about your next book, have me do it.
Okay, that's a long time coming. Don't hold your breath. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you for that very great conversation, Sir Glenn and Miss Gina. But before we end this fully booked chats, oh, we're drinking wine here. I would like to invite you for a fast talk. So I'll just be asking this or that or simple questions. And then you'll just answer the first thing that comes to your mind and maybe explain in 1 to 2 sentences if you would like. Don't worry, no follow up questions from our end. So maybe Sir Glenn and then Miss Gina when you answer the question na lang. Okay. On reading, so paperback or hardcover?
Paperback always for me.
Miss Gina.
Burgis na kasi ako ngayon. I've been reading hardbacks. You know why? Because the publishers give them to me.
Okay.
Oh. Okay. Bookmark or dog ear?
I do both. I dog ear a lot. Yeah.
Miss Gina.
Yeah, I never dog ear. I only bookmark.
Oh no, sorry, Gina. It's all,
That's fine. You know, you have to see that everyone that I've seen doing, they have all of these yellow post-its. Ganyan, ganyan.
Okay. Do you write in your books? Nako.
I do. Yeah, I'm quite merciless with my books. Yeah.
How about you, Miss Gina?
I write in books for school, but never for my own.
Really? That's interesting. Okay.
So how,
I keep the books pristine,
Okay.
my own books that I own.
so how do you take notes from your reading?
Right now, I take pictures
Oh,
and then I put them in notes on my iPhone,
okay.
and then I never read them.
Okay, just to keep it. Okay, so when writing first drafts, do you write by hand or do you type?
I always type.
Oh,
Yeah.
I type.
okay, that's good. You're same. Do you read one book at a time or multiple books at the same time?
Oh no, I'm quite polygamous when I read. I read a lot at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I have many books at the same time.
Great. Okay, so for the lightning questions, who is your favorite writer?
Oh my God, it's an impossible
Sorry.
question. No.
I'm so sorry.
I'm gonna say Rosario Cruz Lucero.
Okay.
That is really hard. I actually cannot answer. Maybe right now, in terms of what I'm reading, Estrella Alfon.
Okay.
Really?
I love Estrella.
Well, look at it. Okay. Book or books that you always recommend?
For Filipino readers, I always recommend. Sige, I just say Feast and Famine by Rosario Cruz Lucero na lang. The same. Yeah.
And Miss Gina.
I'd say Filipino readers, I'd say the poetry of Eric Gamalinda. I love Eric's poetry. And in general, I really like Machado de Assis, the Brazilian.
Really? Okay.
Okay. If you could ask anyone, dead or alive, one question, who would it be and what would you ask?
Only for the thing I'm writing, I want to ask Magsaysay, Ramon Magsaysay, if the CAA killed him.
Ako naman,
Yeah.
ako naman, I may as well ask Pio Valenzuela, what exactly did Rizal really say?
Perfect. Okay. Any advice to aspiring Filipino writers, especially for this unprecedented times?
Fight the government.
Very good advice.
Gina.
It's the same, fuck Duterte. That's what I would say.
Okay, and finally, the Fully Book signature question for Fully Book chats. Do you judge a book by its cover?
Ako yes or no. Yes and no pala. Yeah, I'm attracted to wonderful design, but at the same time I'll read stuff that's not so appealing visually.
Gets. How about you, Miss Gina?
I would say no. I judge more soccer jerseys. Ugly soccer jerseys. I judge those, but not book covers.
But
Okay.
beautiful, super beautiful cover, by the
That's
way, Gina.
beautiful.
I
It's a beautiful
know.
cover.
That's Juan Luna.
That's so
It's in
That's
cute.
Juan
Luna.
Luna's
Okay.
portrait of Rizal. So it's
Okay.
like Soho moving forward into my next novel.
Ah, nice, nice.
When can we expect that?
I don't know, but Soho's coming out with Bibliolepsy.
Oh,
So
okay.
that is the next novel that I'm going to be wandering around with. So my
Yay.
first novel, Bibliolepsy, is going to be published. I don't know when, but I've already done the editing on that. I didn't do any additions really to Bibliolepsy. So that's the next.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much, Sir Glenn and Miss Gina, and of course to everyone who joined us today. Get your own copies of Insurrecto and The Revolution According to Raymundo Mata at our online store, www.fullybookedonline.com. The Quiet Ones by Glenn Diaz is also available for a limited time only at our online store. Click the link at the comment section of this video to get your own copies. Also, please help us improve our virtual events. Please answer our events feedback survey also at the comment section. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the day. Keep on reading.
Thank
Thank
you. So
you.
good to see you. Thank you very much for having me.